We were definitely looking to harken back to the Universal Pictures in the period scenes and the sets for the prologue to the picture. The rest of the movie is contemporary, and at that point it became important that the world seemed believable and real when we got into the suburbia and the interior of the house, and we tried to keep it as grounded as possible. And even the scary mansion, which is, you know, ostensibly the scary set of the movie in the middle of the picture, even that had a kind of a reality base. It was clearly just an abandoned old antebellum mansion. Bradford May was the cinematographer, and he brought an enormous graciousness to the picture as well as a great visual style, and it's tough to find both. You know, there was no hint of a prima donna here. This was his first picture as a DP, but it's so sumptuous looking and so rich, and you know, all the lighting was motivated, and you know, when we wanted it to be spooky, there would be, you know, a little bit of blue, and if we wanted it to be warm, there'd be. I just loved the color palette, but I really appreciated his sensibilities.
The lighting design of Monster Squad was to be a scary kind of movie, but yet more up. So I wanted it to have a brighter, more colorful feel to it, because it was a monster movie, and usually those movies are very film noir in their style. And since it was a kids movie, or that's the way we kind of planned it to be, it was about children, we wanted more of a very colorful palette and a little bit more up in its exposures than dark and dreary.
Brad's a champ. His energy was unflagging. I never saw him sit down, ever. Never saw him with a cup of coffee. He was just on it, and if it meant him having to move a light himself, boom, he'd do it.
I think I had a vision for it, and I wanted to bring Fred's vision to fruition, and I think we achieved that.
With many of the people that worked on the film, it was serendipitous because we got wonderful people. And Bruce is someone who Peter and I, and Fred, music we had loved.
I'd seen Silverado, and the music by Bruce Broughton was, to me, so rousing and such a great statement of sort of everything that a Western should sound like while still scoring the movie. So it was a pastiche that didn't sound like a pastiche. And I thought that's exactly what we need for this movie. And I also knew that I wanted a composer that would do a classical score.
Fred was very young. To work with, he was great. He was very young, but he was very young. He was very enthusiastic, and he had lots of energy. He had Peter Hyams as his, I think, executive producer, who he looked up to and who sort of mentored him. And Peter, of course, had a lot of technique and a lot of ability. But the thing I remember between the two of them was it was not Peter's movie, and Peter was very sure that it was Fred making the decisions.
I was very hands-on in laying out what I wanted from the score, not so much in following him and standing over his shoulder at the keyboard while he came up with it. I said I want it to have a classical structure, I want certain characters to have themes, I want it to have a kind of a rousing quality.
Actually, the scene that I remember I really enjoyed in this was the opening scene. And that whole thing, that whole scene was just so over the top. I did it sort of like a 1930s movie gone mad. You know, I mean, just very chromatic things, and the music's getting higher and higher and more frantic and faster and faster and faster. Suddenly it's all over. You know? And that was really fun to construct. It was fun to play, and yeah, that part I got off on.
First day of scoring with a full orchestra and Bruce tapping his baton and the first cue coming up, I burst into tears. It was like my whole life had led up to that moment.
One producer said to me one time, he said, you just can't imagine the effect of seeing the score on a film that you've worked with for so many weeks and can't make any better, and you just had to live with, and suddenly the music comes up and it all works, And I think Fred may have been reacting to that when he saw it come alive. It was sort of like his movie had gained more of a heart, or a bigger heart, had more of a feeling. And then you hope that the feeling is the feeling that's appropriate for all the other steps yet to come, which is the marketing and the audience and the studios and all those other people.
The visual effects were done by Boss Film, headed by Richard Edlund, which was the company at the time. They'd done Ghostbusters, they'd done 2010, a lot of big effects movies, and they had a effects house down in Marina del Rey. So I made a couple of pilgrimages down there, one time to watch them doing the Vortex, which was done in a cloud, what we call a cloud tank, which is a giant tank of water, and they inject dyes and various things to create the illusion of clouds and swirls, and so that was very exciting.
One of the most important things about visual effects is to design them early and then hold to that when the time came. And then when the time came to shoot those shots, right next to the camera, Richard would be there, and there'd be a light stand with the shot, the storyboard. So it was, and there it was, number 20, shot 21. You'd frame it, then the film would go to Richard, and then his guys would go and do their thing.
I think they're pretty spectacular, and I particularly like, now that we're in the age of digital effects, I like that they look handmade. Those are actual miniatures that somebody built by hand, and it's all got a kind of an old school quality, which, if dated, at least belongs in an homage to the old Universal monster movies.
Marker.
Action. The biggest difficulties I had were my inexperience. The first couple of days of the picture is always tough because you have to gain the confidence of the crew. In my case, I not only had to gain the confidence of the crew, I had a couple things going against me. One, I was 27 years old. Two, the crew had been working with Peter for years, and when he came on the set, sort of looked to him to call the shots. And so that was very difficult. But eventually we established a rhythm, and they began to trust me, I think. Mostly because it was clear that I was so connected to the subject matter. And also my relationship with the kids was so unencumbered and true and real and wonderful, because I've always been kind of a kid myself, that I think that kind of won the day.
He had a big, big responsibility, and I always saw it. I always saw everybody around him wondering whether or not he was going to be able to pull this off. And I mean, no one was skeptical or anything, but it just seemed like, wow, this guy's got a huge opportunity here, and I never saw it in his face. I just saw, like, I know what I'm doing.
The way that Fred and I would work when I was on set is that, generally speaking, I couldn't read at the time. So I'd show up on set with my mom, and we'd get the pages for the day, and she would go over with me the lines until I had them memorized. And then I'd sit with Fred for a few minutes, and he'd be like, okay, you're going to be scared, or I want you to say it like this. And he was really, really great. He really sort of took me through it step by step, and he was really wonderful to work with.
I think Fred Decker did great, considering all the things he had to deal with kids and having only be able to shoot with them for like 8 hours at a time and all these effects. And I don't think he'd ever directed much before. I think he'd done one other thing. And I thought, we did okay. There's one moment in the movie where we had a bit of a disagreement at the very end. I smiled when I grabbed Duncan and threw him over the church or whatever. And Fred said, what do you can't smile, this is supposed to be like your vengeance. And I said, well, this is how I'm vengeful. And he said, well, you can't do that. I said, well, you know, you can't stop me. I remember the quote that I used when I talked to Fred. I said, you know, you put me in this fucking costume, you wrote the script, I've done everything you've wanted. I'm not doing anything else. You've had as much input as you're gonna have. And just did the scene. And I'm not like that. I've never done that in a movie, maybe once or twice. And then later we talked and he said, you know, I think you made the right choice. I was just freaked out. It was the end of the movie and, you know. I wish I hadn't said this, but go on.
You know, with all humility, there was no point in the picture, apart from certain personalities, that there was no point where I felt overwhelmed. It was such a great sandbox, or the train set that Orson Welles talks about. Because not only was I making this movie, which was, you know, certainly the biggest thing I'd ever done, but I was making a movie with these monsters who I'd loved as a kid. I was making it with these filmmakers who I idolized. It was just, you know, a wonderful experience, even when there was tough times.
Oops. That's all right. I guess I must have a stupidity problem. What'd you say, faggot? What'd you say? You're an asshole.
Over the years and recently, in retrospect, we've gotten a lot of guff for some of the political incorrectness of the way the kids talk and the way the kids behave. And I would dispute that for a couple of reasons. One, there is not a truth to it, but there is a sort of basis in truth. You know, kids talk like, you know, when I was a kid, we said some of the things that these kids say. So I was just using my own experience.
It's okay, you guys. He's friends with us. Come on, don't be chicken shit.
It was the first time I'd ever sworn. And I was actually afraid to say the line because I saw it and I went, Mom, can I say that? Am I gonna get in trouble? She was like, it's okay. You know, go ahead, it's all right. And I was like, all right, cool. This is great.
We were just sort of following our gut as far as making an entertaining picture that we were amused by. I mean, frankly, when Shane and I wrote the script, a lot of the stuff was just to make us laugh. And to have these little kids saying some of these things and toting 12-gauge shotguns and, you know, trying to take pictures of naked girls, that to us was funny. And some of it, you know, I think rings true to being a kid. Not the 12-gauge shotgun part, by the way.
I expect you boys thought I was some kind of monster myself.
One of my favorite moments would be when Scary German Guy points to his reflection in the mirror and he says, I'm not a vampire. And Horace says to him, boy, you know a lot about monsters, don't you? And he closes the door and we see the concentration camp tattoo on his wrist. I just find that moment kind of jarring in a good way because it tells us a lot about this character and it injects a reality base, a historical reality into something that's a fantasy. And I think it sort of ups the stakes and says, you know, yes, this is a fantasy movie, but we're not going to ignore reality because then there's nothing to hang on to emotionally. I love directing action because that's where you're really making a movie. When people are talking in a room, well, you can do that on stage. If you're just trying to do comedy, you can do that on television. It's only really in the movies with cutting and moving the camera and pyrotechnics and all that and physical floor effects that something that's purely cinematic can really happen, and I just enjoy that enormously.
Kick him in the nose! Kick him in the nose!
Well, obviously, the marquee line that's followed me around for years is "Kick 'em in the nards." That's the most highly requested and most original line that I, you know, probably in just about any movie. People ask me where it comes from. I said, hey, you got to ask the writers, you know. And it's just a great line, and no one's copied it.
Wolfman's got nards! Come on! Come on!
You know, the Wolfman's Got Nards thing is, first of all, it's a kind of a cheap joke. But more importantly, Dracula has nards. I would think Frankenstein's monster has enormous nards. And the creature probably has little ones. Little ones.
You know, Wolfman's Got Nards just works. Just works.
The mummy's nards are completely dried up and useless. So if you tried to kick the mummy in the nards, I think he would just sort of unravel and fall apart. You know, you could kick him anywhere, he'd actually unravel and fall apart, as we see in the movie. The part of making the movie that I remember the most vividly is the part that I remember with the most fondness, and that was shooting the last 20 minutes of the movie, which was toward the end of the shoot. I can't remember exactly, but I had my sea legs. The crew was kind of behind me. Peter Hyams had sort of stepped back in terms of, you know, frankly, kind of micromanaging how to direct the movie. And I think that's when I felt the freest, and I think that's the best part of the movie.
The whole finale of the movie was done in the Warner Brothers back lot. It was done over about an 8 or 9 day period. Probably the most challenging for Fred Decker and myself and our production team was those 8 days because of the amount of things: lightning, wind, protecting the actors' eyes, taking young girls out and running them with stuff going on, and that was very challenging.
And at that time of the year, it was freezing in Burbank. So everyone's bundled up, you got goggles, here comes take one, and all this stuff is being blown at you in your mouth. I mean, the first take was a disaster. So it's like, no, less dirt, less mulch. You know, you want the wind, but it was hard.
You guys!
Oh, shit! Patrick, come on! Okay, come on, read the book! Right!
Probably my favorite line in the movie is when Rudy realizes that he's got a crossbow in hand and it's up to him to take out the vampire brides that are walking towards them, and he says,
I'm in the goddamn club, aren't I?
To me, it was almost like a throwaway line, because when we shot it, I just kind of like brushed past everyone, just like, I'm in the goddamn club, and I light a smoke. And it just seemed to me like that was going to be like this thing that, and when you see the film, it's just like, dun, dun, dun. And it definitely is one of my favorite lines. I'd never shot a gun before, and they sent me to a shooting range, and I didn't know what I was going to do. And I didn't know how I was going to react and what it was going to feel like, the kickback and everything. And Fred said action, and I'm doing the bullets, and I'm thinking in my head, like, what am I doing here? Like, I don't know how to do. And I loaded it, and I said bang, and I shot, and they said cut, and they said moving on. And I said, that's acting? Awesome. This is great. I'm good at this.
Right before the scene where Dracula lifts me up and says, you know, give me the amulet, you bitch, where I'm standing on this like wooden platform, and Fred goes, okay, so, you know, I want you to scream in this scene. I'm like, okay, where? And he goes, oh, you'll know.
She had never seen him in the makeup before, with the teeth and the eyes.
In fact, from the beginning of the movie, I pretty much avoided her as much as I could. And then we put in the special fangs and the dialogue, and it was pretty intense.
And Fred goes action, and Duncan opens his eyes and opens his mouth and hisses at me. And that scream is one take. And it was real.
I think she felt pretty helpless, and I felt terrible afterwards. She's a cute kid.
Took a long time for her to calm down after that. But it wasn't by design. It wasn't one of those silly things like you see in a movie where, you know, directors are trying to do some sort of stunt to scare someone. That wasn't the intention. It just is the way it worked out.
I think it's a great scene in the end, and a lot of the tension that was there in that scene was real. I mean, you know, we were trying to work through a very challenging portion of the film there, and it sort of came out on the screen as being something natural, and that quite often happens, you know, where the set gets a little bit tense because there's a lot of difficult things, a lot of, special effects are involved, and things have to go just right, or we have to do it all over again. So there's a lot of pressure on everybody, and that sometimes works to your advantage, and sometimes you get really, really good material that way.
The only scene that was really hard to do was the scene at the very end, because the physical problems was when I'm going to get sucked into the vortex of time or whatever, and the little girl's reaching out to me. Well, they said, Tom, we're gonna put a fan on and get a little breeze going, and we're gonna put some stuff in it so it looks like, Well, they put on this fan like the size of like off a SAC bomber, this huge fan, and then they start throwing everything they could find onto the thing, like pieces of wood and leaves and dirt, and I'm getting bombarded with this, stuff flying at like 200 miles an hour. And I'm looking at it and get killed. I mean, the kid almost got, at one point she started getting actually blown away.
That part was a little scary because I'm sitting here, I'm like 40 pounds on this grass with these huge fans blowing, and they're, yanking the benches away, and I'm like literally gripping onto the grass, like to keep from blowing away.
And in the middle of that, I'm supposed to be doing the big moment in the film where I'm reaching out to her, and I'm supposed to be upset, and I finally bonded with somebody, and it was hard. And they have me on a skateboard too, and they're pulling me by my feet with a rope, and also then they green screened it where they put you in this harness and they spin you around, and you have to do the same thing, and it was just physically really difficult.
It is a really sad moment when he gets pulled away, and it for me felt real. I mean, for me to think of a great friend, suddenly disappearing, it's really sad. And it's sort of, in a lot of ways, the heart of the movie is their sort of bond and their friendship, and that, sometimes for, good to be restored, you have to lose people that you love, which is kind of a hard lesson for kids, but a worthwhile one.
Who to call when you have ghosts. But who do you call when you have monsters?
We're the Monster Squad.
I'm not sure that it was marketed as well as it could have been, but I don't blame the marketing department so much as the fact that the movie was a little bit ahead of its time. I mean, who are you marketing this movie to? If you're marketing it to kids, their parents are going to be afraid to bring them to it because there's monsters in it. If you're marketing it to teens and adults, they're going to think it's a kids movie. So I don't think it's the marketing department's fault that the movie kind of canceled its audience out theatrically.
What we didn't anticipate was that parents would be scared of the movie and think that it was inappropriate for their kids. I think at the time that they were right. I think if we had it to do all over again, we'd make the same movie the same way, but probably would have toned down the places where we pushed it.
Give me the amulet, you bitch!
The fact that the movie wasn't a huge success didn't even really occur to me. It was just sort of something I did, and I had no expectations of it being a big hit because I'd never done a feature film before. So it was, on everything else I'd worked on, you did it and people saw it, and then it was over.
Sometimes you do a film and it takes 3 weeks and you're like, that was fun, that was good, great. I had a great time, the director was great, and all the actors are great, and then it comes out and it doesn't do anything, and you're like, well, it was good. This seemed like a lifetime making this film. Like, it was, there was relationships, and we met people, and we were there a lot, and all of our families were there because our kids and their mothers became friends, and it just seemed like this big family, and we were all like really excited for this to happen, and then nothing.
Abraham von Helsing, this is great! This is German.
I never saw it as a not success because I know, the ton of people that did see it loved it and saw it more than once. And, that kind of follows you through. So, years later, you're like, wow, did it not do that well? But I think a box office number, there's movies that have done, $100 million that nobody would buy the DVD.
Are you dead?
Dead?
I remember it coming out and didn't follow it much. I was never much into the business and following things. I remember thinking, geez, that's fast. And I remember thinking also they marketed it really badly. I think they wanted to not make it seem too scary, but make it seem like it would appeal to a lot of different groups of people. And I think they should have focused on one and try to sell it there.
It's always a bit of a crapshoot with whatever it is. It's all timing, it's all marketing, and all of those ingredients have to be in, and things have to fall in the right place at the right time.
It was a real disappointment that this picture didn't do as well as we had hoped. It was a real disappointment. This movie killed my career, actually, for a couple of years, and then I made RoboCop 3 and I killed it again. So I'm still kind of recovering from that, frankly.